The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Come take your seats. I know it's probably not liturgically proper, but it works. And our presentations keep getting better and better and better. And I'd like to introduce to you the Vicar of Trinity Wall Street, Michael Bird. And sir, it's all yours.
Thank you. It's great to be with you today. It was lovely to be with many, most, or all of you yesterday. Thank you for giving me an excuse to chant. Our clergy rotation really does push to the equitable side, which means, for good or ill, I don't get to hear myself sing very often. There are 3 rules in my family. We try to keep it easy. Rule number 1, know your surroundings. Rule number 2, it's not about you. And rule number 3, participate. As far as I'm concerned, all 3 apply universally to everything under the sun, and particularly to the things that we have here. I am delighted to join you and not have to defend the use of incense in church. But I do think we can come to some common understandings of why we have it, what we do with it, how to use it, and then what I thought I would do is give you as much time as you need to ask questions, because that tends to be, in my experience of conversations around incense, where all the good stuff is. You should know, you might have noticed last night, we do use incense at Trinity Church. We don't use it at all services. And in my previous parish, which was Christ Church in Bronxville, New York, just a few miles from here, we got to the point where we were using incense on a regular basis, sort of every Sunday, but that was a 10-year journey. So I can offer a lot of context around that. So I thought I would start with my humbling story about incense. I have many, but my most recent involves this particular item, which is one of our thuribles at Trinity Church. We call it our Bauhaus thurible because it seems to be of that lineage. We decided that this thurible looked like Lent, right? It was simple. It's not austere, but it really sort of, that doesn't scream Lent. Fair? So we had this one, and Scott and I were so excited to pull this thing out and use it, and we practiced because the chain is really short, right? So we had to adjust how we were going to hold it, how we were going to use it, this, that, or the other. The first Sunday comes up. The vicar is scheduled to be the celebrant. I'm moving my way around, we have a freestanding altar, so I'm moving my way around the altar, and as I'm coming around, right, to the place where I am now facing the reredos with the people behind me, I look at the deacon, and the deacon's eyes are getting wider. And I'm wondering what it is that could be happening that has grabbed Mother Beth's attention. As I'm moving around, I notice that my chasuble seems to be moving with the thurible. So it turns out that when you have a new thurible and you don't know how hot it really runs, and you have a Lenten chasuble whose liner is not from things that are organic, sometimes when the 2 meet during liturgy, bad things happen. So I literally set on fire the lining of the chasuble. Mother Beth, who's brilliant liturgically, walked around, met me, lifted up the chasuble so I could, of course, finish censing the altar, and away we went. And you're welcome to look at this later, you might notice a little discoloration on the bottom of this, and that would be the ox blood lining from the chasuble that has now been replaced by a more organic substance, and we now know how to better manage the temperature of this particular thurible. So it's the place where anything that can go wrong will go wrong, but it's also the place where, as you know, there is deeply embedded symbolism. One of the things that liturgy, and this is my definition, so, right, you can argue with it or throw it away or keep it. One of the things for me that liturgy must do is engage all five senses. Incense buys you two. It's a twofer. Right? Let my prayers be set forth in your sight as incense. Psalm 114. When we see it, there's something about that. Particularly on a great Sunday morning when a ray of light is coming in through one of your upper windows and it all catches that smoke that gives the sense of the other, which I'll talk about in just a minute. And then there is the smell. Now, there are two things in church, right, that will immediately cause a fight. One of them is incense, its presence or absence, or its smell. And the other is changing the flavor of communion wine. If you want open rebellion, you engage those two things, right? In the case of incense, there are many ways to approach what that smell is, right? Some of us use a uniform incense all the year round because nobody likes a surprise, and there's something about the familiar that allows people to relax and open up and participate. Other churches change the incense per season. I have a miles-long list of the recipes from Christ Church Bronxville that were, I would say, tested over time, and their final results. But no matter what, incense is designed to engage us in what's happening, which means, of course, rule number 2, it's not about you. It's not a showstopper. Well, that is my opinion. If the liturgy moves to what the thurifer is doing, we might have just lost sight of what God is doing through us and with us in the context of the liturgy. And there's a balance in there, and the rest of this is all going to be about balance, right? The balance is, how do we be reverent and prayerful and then do that thing which so many churches are missing, which is also be joyful. A joyful thurifer can be a great gift and a walking hazard. So the language around what it is we have asked them to do and how we have asked them to do it matters. So let me get to Rudolf Otto and the idea of the holy, if I might. Otto, among many things, allowed that beauty was an entrance to God, right? We are in a place that was designed with that in mind. We're not in the best representative part of the place that was designed in that way, but nevertheless, beauty opens us up to the presence of the divine, to the presence of God. At the same time, beauty and what we do allows us to experience God both as the other that cannot be defined and as the one that knew us, loved us, walked with us in the person of Jesus Christ, and continues to influence us through the work of the Spirit and the care and comfort we give one another and receive from God Almighty. Incense is the place where we get both, and here's Rudolf Otto's phrase, the immanent and the transcendent. It can provide us both of those things in a way that words can't. Music is similar, and yes, I have just equated music to the use of incense. both create an atmosphere, both create thin places, both are low threshold moments liturgically. One of the things that we see at Trinity, because it's been closed so long, let me say, at Trinity Church, if you're in a worship space, you are never not on camera. All day, every day. And Scott Smith had installed on our floor, which was very dangerous, a monitor sort of in between my desk and his, from which we can see every single camera that's in a liturgical space. Which doesn't mean I check up on our clergy or our sacristans, but it does mean I get this moment. I get to see what happens when people come through the main doors and are hit with what that church is. And what I see time and time and time again is them stop and look up and take up room that we don't want them to take up in the entrance. All right? And then I see our ushers or our greeters or sometimes our security folks, if they're there too long, sort of help them move on their way, and they don't, generally speaking, take their photo and run. They find a pew, they sit in it, and they take it in. And what I know is that the beauty is doing its work, right? They feel the imminence of a space that has been prayed in since 1846. The imminence of God they experience in the kind gesture, the imminence of that smell that no matter how long we wait between services with incense is always in there. And the transcendence of this not being that noisy, hustling, bustling, aggressive city that they left to come in and catch a glimpse of the kingdom of heaven. So when we deploy incense, we are contributing to that as a definition, one of the definitions of why we exist and why we do what we do. Because one of the things we know right now is that the crisis facing our time, and certainly the crisis facing our young people, is their emotional well-being, their mental health. So if churches can be a place of refuge, if they can indeed be sanctuary, if they can be a time out, what a gift it is that we're giving them. And what a gift it is that we give the world. That's why the doors being open matters. So with that in mind, let me also engage around incense the reality that incense can also keep people out of church. Like, I wasn't going to pretend that didn't exist. Right? I have received more emails over time than I can possibly tell you about people who are sensitive to incense and things like that, and I will not dismiss it. There are too many super asthmatics in my life, and particularly coming off of COVID-19 and all of the things that we worried about in that, to think that that's just in their heads. Right? It is, no matter how we slice it, particulate matter in the air, as hypoallergenic as we define it. And yet, it has not passed its point of usefulness. So I strongly believe in the use of incense, and at the same time, I strongly believe that you can smell it from pretty far away. And you can see it from just about anywhere. And that is an exercise, I think, in pastoral care and ministry of presence. So, for instance, at Trinity Church at the gospel procession, the incense, if this is the main aisle and this is the crossing, and you may have noticed last night our crossing is, this isn't being recorded, or it is?
I think it is.
All right, well, whatever. It was great working there. Our crossing is stupid big,
Yeah, it is.
right? We do have orchestras, and they come and play, and it's really useful to have a space for them without having to remove pews. The idea was that then we would fill that crossing with chairs so that people, all Episcopalians want to come early and sit up front. Right? So it wasn't supposed to feel that big, but it's enormous. So we decided we can use it to our advantage. The thurifer leads the procession, stays in the crossing. The procession passes by as the deacon gets ready to announce the gospel. They go, the deacon uses it, and the thurifer comes back and takes a place in the crossing so that if you're looking, as the gospel is being read out loud in the midst of the people, you see the incense going up and carrying it up and carrying it out. And no one is doing this, right, in that circle around the gospel reading. We have tried to look at that as much as we possibly can. We have some advantages. We can put our choir anywhere. They're meant to be in the gallery in the back where the main organ will be built. They're currently up front, but there's so much room. At Christ Church Bronxville, the choir sat in my lap. Right? It was an eastward altar, and the choir was just there, and the sanctuary was as tight as it could be. And we had to find a way to allow our singers to sing without creating so much atmosphere that they were more worried about that than they were about this prayerful offering, right, that they're making on our behalf. Distance is useful. We had this thing at Christ Church, and this staff is still there, so I can throw them under the bus. Christ Church was the first home of the American expression of the Serameuse that came out of Salisbury Cathedral. The Serameuse grew over time in the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th centuries, essentially. It was the definition of English liturgy at its most expressive. Its singular quality was that it was adaptable and adapted constantly. Because of that, and because of the depth of symbolism and meaning within that particular use, it made its way all the way to Rome and was becoming the liturgy in fashion in Rome until that little thing called the Reformation happened. And then doing anything associated with the English was sort of a no-fly zone. But it continues to live on in the Roman Catholic Church in the Dominican Rite, which is an almost, and I'm going to use this term deliberately, unreformed version of the Serameuse. So Christ Church Bronxville was the home of the Serameuse. It arrived there in the 1930s. The rector and his assistant, their names were Harold Holy, the rector, and Morton Stone, the curate. So you had Holy and Stone together for 20 plus years. They went over to England, they met with Percy Dearmer, they talked with all of these people, they did their research, they got all the books, they wrote notes copiously through all the books, they still live in the archives in there. They brought it back, they refashioned the church space, a church space that was finished in 1926 and they messed with it by 1937. And then they developed a liturgy to match the space. Liturgy in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s is very different than liturgy today. And so during my time as rector, like the building always wins. So we had to adapt a lot of what had been sort of removed. We had to adapt to reclaim some of it, but bring back the parts that were resonant, to modernize, bring back the parts that fit the building, and also bring back the parts that fit the principles of the liturgical renewal movement, right, that started in the middle of the 20th century and certainly got their fullest expression universally in the documents of Vatican II, and then through the Episcopal Church, certainly in the 1979 Book of Common Prayer. One of the things that became very true was that during all of that time, as church attendance started to diminish in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s at Christ Church, they just started scrubbing away all the liturgy because they figured that's not what people wanted. What I found when I got there, and anyone who starts a new job anywhere, right, should go on the listening tour. When I got there, I started to ask, what do you want from your liturgy? Not that I'm going to change the words or the order of events or, right, not the hymn, your Aunt Gertrude wrote, that kind of stuff. But what is it you're looking for? And what they were looking for was a sense of the other. Something that allowed them to, what do we say about liturgy? Life is hard. We're a mess. Bad things happen to us. Good liturgy allows us, through the power of Jesus Christ, to transform it, not to transmit it. So what they were looking for was a liturgy that had at its expression a sense of the other, a sense of the different. And so essentially they asked for incense to come back in that place at that time without really knowing what they were asking for. It took a decade to get it to the point where that's how they defined their major liturgy. And it will change because someone else is now the prime liturgical officer in that space. And that is well and good, right? But it was a manifestation of who they were. So when it comes to incense, the thing that I also want to say is there's introduction and there's education, but it also has to come from the people. It's not something we do to them, right? It's something we do with them. So I'm going to open up to a million different questions, which I'm happy to answer, but I just want to point out a couple things that, right? Bad thurible, good thurible. Thurible cleaning on a regular basis, paramount. One of my favorite churches in Manhattan, which shall not be named, had a lovely fire because the hood that sat over, so this is a measurement of how much incense they use on a regular basis, was so caked with stuff that it caught on fire, right? Regular cleaning is good. Old incense doesn't smell as good as new incense, particularly if old incense has been burned many, many, many times. The quantity and quality of charcoal matters. You can out-charcoal your incense. And it can actually, I know it burns, but you can get to a temperature where it burns, right? There's the lovely smell of toast cooking, right? And then there's, right, the stuff that is becoming ash right before your very eyes, which leaves a different smell in your house or apartment. So the amount of charcoal matters. Obviously, the quality of charcoal, we don't get a kickback for this, but we do like Three Kings charcoal. There are many others that are fine. The type of incense that you use matters. What I would say is we use a particular kind that is, how would you describe it?
Citrusy.
It's citrusy, and it's also...
It's almost like pine shavings. It's
Yeah.
very, very
It's
fine wood quality to it.
Yeah, so it has a very different texture than rocks of frankincense. Mm-hmm. The thing that I would say, and that's a huge adjustment for me, because I come from the land of rocks of stuff. If you don't use what we use, but you use other things or you make your own blend, one of the things that I will give you as a practical tip is the ability to mix the incense in the boat so that you have full rocks, so it lasts, but you have also ground it at different things so you don't have to wait for that rock to get going. right? That intermixing of things. So we have ruined more, like in my life, I've ruined more coffee grinders from Cuisinart with incense than I can possibly tell you. We are big fans of these as a protective thing, right? If something goes wrong with the thurible, you can bring it to someone who has these nearby who can grab it.
And we also, we actually use those gloves to lift the bowl with the coals in it. I can grab that in the bowl, dump it, and we use a Dutch oven to dump the coals in. Then we put it back, and then we can reignite. Those things are a game changer.
Yeah. Grabbing the bowl with this, it can work sometimes.
Yeah.
So these are really important. We're also big fans of the fire blanket. A fire blanket can put out a fire without spreading fire extinguisher stuff all over your church and into your organ. Right? So this just, in all seriousness, this is the first step. We always have a fire blanket around. Clearly, we have fire extinguishers. The city of New York is very specific about that. Right, the goggles and all of that stuff. This is the torch that we use. Scott is the master of Amazon.
True.
Never has more research been done around the implements that are used liturgically and their availability on an online marketplace. This, right, it's a creme brulee torch, but it's sort of an industrial grade creme brulee torch. And one of the things, as Scott was pointing out to some other people before, is you can see the amount of fuel that's in it, which is really helpful because then you don't have that moment.
And Michael, the one thing about the Three Kings charcoal that's great is you can light it with a match. It's just like charcoal on the grill that you light.
And it sparkles,
It sparkles
to tell you that it's working.
And it takes about 20 minutes to get really good, and it gets really good. But what happens if you're 5 minutes before the service and you say, I forgot to light the charcoal? The creme brulee torch in 1 minute, I can have the coals adequate, and adequate is a careful term there because you can use it. It's a whole lot better for 20-minute natural burning. But I did this maybe 2 weeks ago, forgot. So that saves the boat.
It catches you up.
Yep.
It can also take you past.
Yeah, it's a lot
Right?
you can do with it.
So you need a practiced practitioner in all of this. So I would say that those are the tools of the trade. The thurible itself, it's all independent. The thurible, I wish I could have brought it. The thurible at Christ Church Bronxville. So Christ Church Bronxville, again, built in 2526 by Bertram Goodhue, who participated in St. Thomas Fifth Avenue, St. Vincent Ferrer, Intercession in Harlem, did a lot of churches here and in California. Goodhue had this, appropriately, this thing about natural stuff. And one of the things at Christ Church in Bronxville was he wanted it to seem like it was out in the country. So although they had the ability to put fine stone over rough stone, they chose rough stone to the point that you can still see drill marks in the stone, right? It was like they went out to the field, they made a block, they brought it in, they set it, right? So that went to the point that they didn't want anything that was silver or fancy. Brass does not exist there.
Yeah.
Right? Silver for chalices, but for nothing else. The thurible was made by a blacksmith by the name of Samuel Yellen, whose studio was in Philadelphia. He did the gates at Union Station in Washington, D.C. He did all the ironwork in New York City at the Federal Reserve Bank. That thurible is like a solid 8 to 10 pounds of wrought iron with a wrought iron chain. It's incredible. And the best part about it is when the bishop comes, you can sit back and laugh. There are scars in the altar at Christ Church from Bishop Shin because he took a nice chunk out of the front of the Mensa with that thurible because he didn't judge it just right. And he looked at me with panic and I did. Right? There are many different choices in thurible. A lot of it depends on the church. What I would use at Christ Church Bronxville, I would not have used at my first parish, which was St. Mark's Church in New Canaan. right? A very different space, a contemporary space built in 1964. It just wouldn't work. In a place like this, you can run the gamut from these to that or anything else. And this one is kind of amazing because it has 1 million holes in it. If you have a space this big, you can get away with it. Not in a smaller space, unless you're trying to make enemies or you're that kind of congregation that just loves it so much that you really don't need to see the altar. You just know it's there, right? All of this sort of stuff is useful, but it all comes down to everybody being on the same page. And I think the two things that I would like to sort of hammer home, right? One, it's the ability to open a door to the holy when it's appropriate and when the congregation is with you. And two, it points to Jesus. It is not Jesus. And when you hold those things together and you work with a congregation to develop a way of doing things, it tends to have a much greater degree of success. I can list 1 million times where it wasn't successful at Trinity, where it wasn't successful at Christ Church Bronxville, where it wasn't successful at St. Mark's New Canaan, where I was called a pagan. But you know, as a young priest, you learn from that. You bounce back, and you do it better the next time. So you understand the history of incense. You understand it goes back to Egyptians and beyond and honoring things. You understand its journey through Judaism to Christianity. Maybe best to use this time to answer practicalities, to answer strategies. You can ask me anything theologically about this, and I'm happy to answer it all. But I think the floor is yours. Sorry, Duke, you're gonna.
How do you get past what is your go-to answer to people? What's your go-to answer to people who think you're doing it to them rather than for them or with them?
Right. So every conversation that I'm in, and you can imagine. In the city of New York, it's really hard to find people who have an opinion, but occasionally you'll run into them. For me, that conversation is always invitational. And so what I will hear in that, right, is a reticence, and what I'll say is, I completely get what you're feeling. One of the greatest things that I ever had at my disposal in Bronxville was the largest Protestant church in town, which was the Dutch Reformed Church. All right? Slightly different liturgical methodology. And we would do things together all the time. And I was on record by saying, if I had been born in the Reformed Church, I'm not sure I would be going to church today. Right? And they were horrified. And then I said, but if you were born at Christ Church, you might not be going to church today. Right? But we can all see that what we're doing has meaning. And what I tend to do in an invitational situation like that is hear what their worry is, stand with them in that moment and say, there's an extraordinary history and tradition about this that allows us a sense that this is not about us, it's about God. And there are ways to do this that help us get to God. And this is the way we might do that here. Right? And acknowledging it's not meant to be an impediment. It's meant to be an entrance. Naming it, inviting the conversation is always the best. And that goes with any liturgical change. But certainly about this, I had to do a funeral. So to go back to the pagan, I was invited to do a funeral at St. Mark's New Canaan last June. Right? I had not done anything liturgically there in maybe almost 20 years. The person who called me a pagan was there and said, "Where's the incense today?" Because over time, He understood why I thought it was important in that particular church for major feasts, and that was it. As opposed to it's that thing that we fight about, right? The answer is always in the relationship. Yes?
You said practical questions. We have a pure silver thurible that has probably 30 years of creosote on the inside. How do I clean it without melting it?
Yep, so you find a silversmith because you don't want to be the one who ruins your thurible. And you consult them. We have silversmiths in our lives. I've had one in my life in New York who just recently retired, who, how do I put this? Was confident enough in his ability with silver to use an over-the-counter commercial product for cleaning ovens. Mm-hmm. But only he could do that. Yep. And he knew he was on the line for it. There are a lot of organic products that actually help soften that up and take it off, but I would always allow someone who would do your repairs to do that work. The caveat that I would say is that if you clean it regularly, you will never be in that position. Yep. And that's best practice.
Which leads me to my question is, what do you do to regularly clean it? How do you clean it?
You have one person really on the altar guild or involved with the altar guild.
Mic on?
One person that's involved with the altar guild that really knows that. And this oven cleaning product of which the vicar speaks is quite helpful, especially on the inside. So
never on the outside.
Yeah, where the dirt is on the thurible is, I mean, the resin is of course on the top, and there's soot and everything on the bottom. So she spends a lot of time cleaning that, but we do it every week, and it's always clean. This is dirty from evensong. By Sunday afternoon, it'll be cleaned again. And just bear in mind, the inside is totally different from the outside. She polishes and does all the normal silver maintenance on the outside, and it always looks basically exactly like this. But constant care is really the key.
So what I use over here is acetone.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure is that a good thing or not? It works very well. And if you do it acetone. Acetone.
Acetone. Right.
I'm not a big acetone fan or muriatic acid. I've had other people that have used other acidic compounds as well. I still refer back to the it's Easy Off that we use on the inside that does, it's designed to take resin off of your oven on the inside of the oven. It's the exact same thing, basically. Just have to be very careful with it to not get it on the silver side.
There are ways to do things with ammonia and
Yep.
baking soda and stuff like that as well. I'm sure we could source something and send something out.
Yep.
Make sure in a well-ventilated area.
Yes, I call it outdoors in a hefty bag, but
Lisa Churchill, St. Paul's Cathedral, San Diego, and we use incense twice every Sunday. Once at 10:30, the main 10:30 service, and then again at evensong. And we do all the things, well, not all the things you talk about, but we send it out to someone. We don't send it to a silversmith. We have a gentleman who's been there for years, and he's called a metal finisher. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to just look for silversmiths. That's another thing you could look for is metal finisher. In addition, some of the thuribles, particularly the one we use most often, has a copper insert.
bowl, yeah.
And we cover that with aluminum foil after we have Mr. Chidgey clean it up because there are always spills. So we use the foil as a kind of in between Mr. Chidgey visits, and we send it out probably twice a year. Mm-hmm. Yeah, on the top, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
He has to take care of that for us.
To your point about the bowl, right? If you're at a church that has a thurible that's been sitting around and you're interested in starting to use it or something like that, you have to have a bowl. It's an insulator. so that the heat isn't directly on the outside wall of the thurible, right? So our bowl is here for that one. And there are lots of people who are metal workers who can make you a copper bowl, right? And all of those other things. That's also, we had ours adjusted, actually, Scott, sorry. We had ours adjusted so we could put this little handy dandy handle on it, right? As opposed to trying to grab it with the tongue. See, look at that. Yeah. So it just, the things that facilitate ease of cleaning are always going to allow for more cleaning.
My worst mess was a fellowship group in recovery group that decided to, at the end of their service, to write their prayers and concerns on Post-it notes and stick them in my thurible. Yeah.
It's nothing like
End of
adhesive
discussion.
in your thurible. Yes.
Well, it melted the knob on the top.
You have the gloves up there, and that's what I'm really concerned about. Could you use like a pair of gloves that you buy,
So
or
we
are these special?
prefer they're barbecue gloves.
Yeah.
So the ones that you get, right, like for people who are hardcore grill enthusiasts, right, and they're grabbing cast iron pans off the thing and everything out.
These are
every
called,
hardware store I've been in.
Yeah. These, once again, came from Amazon. These are grill armor gloves, and they're really incredible. But when you put them on, they're rubber here. But honest to goodness, coals burning, I can do that, and the other one is on. I don't even know. I can touch the coals if I want to move the coals around, and you can do that, with this. But this is really hard. That's like, ugh, you can't do it. So put the gloves on, and I can touch anything. And I really have to be sure to remember, do I have the gloves on or not? Because I'm just, I mean, with this, there's always safety in mind.
Yeah.
It's very easy. I haven't burned myself. Oh, well, I mean, I sort of burned myself, but not major.
Do you have a preference between a multiple string or a single chain?
So the question was, do I have a preference between a single string thurible, right, a single chain, or a multiple chain? I prefer a multiple chain. I also always prefer, and all of the ones here, no, this one a little bit less so. Do you mind? Okay. So there are a million different ways to hold a thurible, right? We actually have I just had a conversation with our sacristans about handoffs, because we have 9 clergy, and I haven't beaten them into submission yet. So we're not uniform, right? Or me, quite honestly. So I want it here, and I want to hand it off from here, which means the thurifer is receiving it here, because I haven't given them any other room, right? On the other hand, there are some clergy, right, or vice versa, who prefer to hold it here. I prefer multiple chains because it just feels more secure to me, and I feel like I have more control when I'm handling the thurible. I have mixed feelings about this, which is the lock, because honestly, I feel like it causes more trouble than it's worth if we hand things well. But the thurible at Bronxville, the wrought iron one, had handmade individual wrought iron links. So they would talk about cleaning, right? They could get caught up in one another, and we could get stuck, right? Like a link could flip over, and then with many choices, you can figure out what the thing is quickly. The single chain to me just feels flimsy, and it feels like I don't have enough control. The other thing that I would say, just as a practical point, regularly, we always check the links, because that's a bad look.
Yeah.
And the same thing, obviously, with the ring.
I just want to say the young lady who was doing your thurifer last night, it's just a compliment. She did a lovely job.
Regina Jacobs is the best.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah, you got the A team yesterday as far as thurifers are concerned, and and imagine. I mean, we're a fairly large congregation. We encourage a lot of lay participation, which means we don't have one thurifer, or 2 thurifers, right? We can have handfuls of thurifers, and we're aiming to be that. So you don't get to do it all the time. So there's a simplicity in the way we do things that allows people to succeed. Because one of the things that we would all like is for our vergers, our thurifers, right, everyone who's serving to actually be able to worship while they're serving and not spend their time worrying that they're going to get it wrong. One of the great things about Regina is when I get it wrong, which will invariably happen, she makes it look like I know what I'm doing at all times. That's a sign of a great thurifer.
Thank you. I'm Godfrey Gregg from St. Luke's Episcopal in Montclair. And years ago, Atlanta 2017, in Verger 101, a very skilled verger said to us, "Be aware that the devil enters the church through the choir." And that's the COIOR, not the QUIRE. Anyway, we're going to that point. How do you do for a procession in my church? It'll be verger, thurifer, choir, and the choir will always complain, we cannot sing with all the smoke wafting back. So a lot of times we'll maybe put the thurifer behind the choir in front of the banner. Right. How do you, for those of you who have processions with the choir and and all that good old time Episcopal stuff, how do you negotiate that situation? Thank you.
Yep, it's great. Let me also say I was just in your fair town last Saturday night for the Montclair Jazz Festival. It's a great question, and let me wipe away the tear I have for the choir. Sorry, that was totally not fair. I was pandering to my audience. Look, the reality is their concerns are real. We spread out our procession, right? So you have verger, there's a big chunk of distance before you hit the thurifer, and there's another chunk before you hit crucifer and torches, and then the choir. And that allows it to go up and not to waft into them, right? That's the great news. When you're the people who are establishing the liturgical procession, you control the distances. And in Bronxville, which was a tighter space, I would always say something to because we didn't have a verger all the time. I would say, like, the crucifer and the torches were lined up here, the thurifer was out there, and I would sort of dismiss the choir. That's how I knew they'd get out right at the right time. That was my point of privilege, which I no longer have. I would look at the crucifer, and the hymn's going on, and it's grand and glorious because we're about to go out, and I would say, now Miss George is a little reckless with the thurible, so you're going to want to stay back. And they would look at me, and they would smile, and we would have no problem in getting the choir close to, right? So, I mean, there are many ways to do that, but I think the distancing is the way. It takes the comment away, right? It just does.
One other thing that we do at Trinity is we charge the thurible with incense as close to the beginning of the procession as possible, so that we're not just kind of billowing there standing.
And away from the choir.
Yeah, just keep it away, and it will build as you're processing, and then by the time you're at the Gloria, we may sneak just a little
augment. More. Yes,
yeah,
we
but
augment.
I have stuck dried ice in a thurible and got the choir to complain.
I should actually, let me go. I'll take questions, but if you have questions about when we actually use incense during the Eucharist, I can answer that because I know I didn't talk about that.
One of the things that we do for Palm Sunday is we start our service outside, like most churches do, and I do I'm the thurifer for that, even though I'm the verger. But we incense everybody outside, which makes it better, and then I'll lead up to the steps to the church, and everybody gets incense as they go in. And once everybody's in, then I put the thurible inside the door, but leave the other outside door open. So.
Yeah. And that's right, it's always the mitigation. Some churches have ventilation, some churches have windows. The lucky churches have windows up high. The thing, I started a thought earlier, so let me just circle back to it, because I really do want to throw this staff at Christchurch Bronxville under the bus. As I mentioned them earlier, as I was trying, right, decades-long desire to have incense be its fullest expression, sort of in that parish. But every time I went out of town, they lost their minds. Right? They could not, there weren't enough shovels full to be able to put on, and then I would come back and everybody would be mad. I'm like, you want incense, but you just set me back a year and a half.
Yep.
Right? Like quantity, distance, ventilation, all of those things allow you to do what you would like to do without engaging it as spiritual warfare.
I have two questions. First, in our diocese,
I can repeat it if need be.
in our diocese in Mississippi, we are supposed to take the incense to the celebrant, especially if the bishop is there, and get the incense blessed. Do y'all do that? And secondly, would you demonstrate the proper swing? Because we have some people that like to do Queen Anne's around the world.
Gotcha. All right. So let me start with, through the intercession of Blessed Michael the Archangel, who sits on the right hand of the altar of incense, may the Lord bless this incense and accept it as pure oblation through Jesus Christ our Lord. So there's that, blessing of incense. Many choices, all, I'm sure, right, intention matters. So swinging a thurible, I'll just use this one. So there are a million different ways. One of the bugaboos that we haven't quite resolved, because let me also say this. Failure is acceptable at Trinity Church. Like, people make mistakes all the time, right? And we all know perfect is the enemy of the good. So we try to create an atmosphere in which people can do what they need to do. There are some things that they struggle, right? So if they're sensing the congregation, right? So let's say, and everybody has a different practice, and I could pull all the manuals for you, but let's say we're doing doubles, right? Center, center, left, left, right, right. See that little turn I just made? So that I didn't have to stop and start all over again. We have not quite achieved universal success on that at Trinity Church, but I'll be honest, I don't care. I'm just thrilled there are people who want to do this, right? And that they care deeply about it, right? So when we're sensing, so this is to the Christchurch Bronxville clergy are out of control statement. When I was away, they'd sense the congregation by sensing the congregation, right? Nothing makes enemies faster than changing customary to do something that you feel like you should do. But the practice was, and the practice is at Trinity, that it's the vision of being sensed, right? So we come in with incense, the incense goes away. It comes back for the Gloria. We sense the altar during the Gloria, it goes away. It comes back for the gospel procession, right? The gospel book is sensed, and then it's, right, that visual of that being there, and it goes away. And then during the offertory anthem, it's not really, we prep the thurible. We have a slightly different choir than many of you have. Our choir improvises a dirigator, right, a chant about sensing the altar. They improvise it every week, which does not give us time constraints, because they'll keep improvising until we're done. But one of the things that we know is that sensing during the Gloria gives us the layer of music and visual and smell, right? It's a practical thing. Sensing the altar for us during the dirigator, right, that gap between the anthem and the beginning of the Eucharistic prayer, shouldn't take forever. It's self-indulgent. So because we sense the entire altar at the Gloria, and I'm not saying you should do this or not, I'm just explaining our methodology. Because we sense the entire altar at the Gloria, we sense the gifts right? During the Dirigator. And a 1, and a 2, and a 3. And I would do it much more dramatically if it were our thurible. But I don't want to hurt anybody else's. And then there's a handoff. And the thurifer receives it, walks around to the other side of the altar, and the thurifer then senses the entire altar party as one, right? And then turns and acknowledges the congregation and senses the entire congregation as one from the broad step. They see it, they can smell it, they know they were honored as were honored the gifts on the altar and the people serving at the altar. Right, that we are all, right, the holy, right, this is theosis, we're all working towards divinity without, in some cases, inflicting it on them unnecessarily. And that is always about the congregation's perception of that. I would never say we were doing it unless it was a congregation of people who really didn't like it. And then we've created something else. We've created an us versus a them, which I think liturgically is not okay. So does that answer your how to use it? Like, look, I can 360, I can figure 8, I can lasso,
You can do a
I can do...
you could do a helicopter?
Yeah, I can do it
Okay.
all, my friend. I was a teenager once. And all of it is fine until it becomes the reason. It's not the focus. And exactly, rule number 2, it's not about you. So for us, we keep it pretty simple. I also don't do, although I have, again, all the manuals and all the things, we don't divide by, I'm going to use this term, but I don't mean it, rank, right? By order, how many swings you get, right? When the bishop's there, the bishop is part of the altar party. Glad to see you, love you. Right? But you're here with us. So we're sort of, we keep it simple, straightforward, and easy to explain.
Michael, if I could add just one thing to Michael's point earlier, that broad distance at the crossing really helps all of this. Because if you think about this space in Trinity Church, all of the sensing of the congregation happens up the steps. It's a real long way. You can smell it, but you won't get smoked out.
And just to be super clear, that space is new to us.
Yeah.
It didn't look like that, right? It opened right before the pandemic, so then it closed. We will have our first full capacity fall with a coffee hour, right? In a couple weeks. First coffee hour I've been to at Trinity Church. Hasn't happened yet, right? So we are actually in the process of discussing liturgy together all the time. And one of the things that I will say is that we talk about liturgy. And when you work in a different room, right? The building always wins. There were things that I asked us to change. And I think people were shocked that the next week I wasn't at the altar so I could watch. And I went back to the sacristy and I said, oh, we should never do that again. Worked great in Bronxville. Yeah. Looks stupid in New York City, right? Like you have to, it's all part of the thing. Yep, and I know we're over time too, so I want to be sensitive.
You're just cutting into tours. It's okay.
Well, no, because people want to see.
I just had one question. Can you share some of those recipes for the incense?
Yeah, I'll give them to Scott, and we can send them along. Absolutely.
All things like that, PDF presentations, that if you'll give me a day or two at the bottom of the website for this conference, at the bottom, they'll be there.
Great. Well, thanks, everyone. It's a real delight and an honor to have this time with you.
And thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I just want to mention this stand over here is not the cathedral's. It is actually St. Michael's down on 99th in Amsterdam, which is my parish, and I love this thing, and I would like to keep it. But I think it's very handy, especially if you have to move things around in church. So hopefully I can find somebody to make me one like that. There is still room on the tours, which if you want to sign up, and Christine, if you want to say something. Christine Pottinger heads our visitor services over here, and
Hello, welcome. Thank you all so much.